What's the scariest thing you've seen in your life? I'm sure some of y'all know about the famous F5 tornado that hit Alabama years ago. Well, I lived in Tuscaloosa, and it happened to come through our neighborhood. The sounds of the wind were horrid, and it basically sounded like the most god-awful rainstorm despite it. I'm pretty sure, not raining, but I'm also going off pure memory, so bear with me, I could be wrong. I was rather young then, but I still remember seeing it right outside the house and the door being open. I don't even know how it was wide open, and me completely breaking down, thinking my cat was going to be sucked up and killed because Miss Ma'am just was too nonchalant about the damn tornado, and me being absolutely horrified about the sounds and just wishing I wasn't stuffed into a closet by myself and with the cat. Yeah, let's say I'm not fond of any storms and get slight PTSD hearing the sound of the emergency alarm. I think though by the time it made it to where we lived, I think it was starting to not be as strong as the house was. Fortunately, it was undamaged, and the only thing was just a trampoline I had going up and away to somebody's yard. But I also remember it was the aftermath that was really something as well. We were so glad that nobody within our family and none of our friends were hurt or killed, but we saw so many people who were not as lucky as we were, and that was what really haunted me the most about it. Seeing everything I had grown up around completely gone, places I used to go to and see being destroyed, and seeing people outside rumble of their homes was really hard to see as we drove through town to inspect the aftermath. So, my mom's friend had a dog, and her name was Sasha. She was a cane corso that he had since she was a baby, and she was the sweetest thing ever. I personally loved her like that and enjoyed every time I went over there with my mom. But my mom's friend is a little more rough, and he doesn't really like dogs that are scary and don't really know how to defend themselves, so basically he would lock the dog in the closet while he was away and feed her meat and stuff like that, and if I can remember, I heard that meat makes dogs more feral. Inverted question mark, don't quote me, but yeah, she started to get a little different over time. I don't know if it was because of the food or the training, but as if that wasn't enough, he started to put literal gunpowder on her food and feed it to her, which made her absolutely fucking crazy, to the point where he came back one day and she had chewed her way out of the closet. Like, she became a fucking monster just like he had wanted, but she ended up dying, unfortunately, and I felt bad. It sounds like something out of a movie. When I was 8, a motorbike crashed outside my house. I was holding my cat looking out the front window when she suddenly panicked and scratched me. As I turned to put her down, there was the squeal of tires, then a metallic bang. I can only describe the bang as sounding like an old metal dustbin being kicked over. As I looked out, I saw the bike hit our front wall and slide under my dad's car. The rider was splayed out in a star jump position in the road about 20 meters away. It turned out that he had been going down our road at 80 miles per hour, 50 over the limit. Since the last time he had done it, they had put a bollard at the top of the hill. He was going too fast to make the turn with the new bollard. He tried to brake, came off his bike. The metallic sound was his helmet hitting a car so hard he rode it off. I knew it was bad when they were pulling off his helmet and his shoes. They were clearly not worried about injury to his spine because he was actively dying. He was on life support for a while but died without regaining consciousness. His bike totaled our wall and my dad's car. His insurance wouldn't admit fault whilst he was alive. Once he was dead, they then said his policy no longer existed. So that was fun. First was one of him riding his bike at night listening to his CD player when it went to complete static as soon as he entered the light of a streetlight. A few moments later he said he heard some sort of loud, grotesque scream that didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard or could describe from the unlit bridge maybe 200 feet. He immediately got the fuck out of there and stopped going to that part of the trail at night. Another time while cycling at night, he said he saw a ball of light behind him that wasn't illuminating anything around it and was following him as he was cycling in a different part of the trail. Then suddenly it disappeared as fast as it arrived. I've known him for 17 years now, and I've never known him to embellish any other story he's ever told me. Early in 1977, I was in a cafe on Lavender Hill in South London. I just moved into a homeless hostel nearby. There was a young couple sitting at the next table from me. Suddenly the woman shouts to the cafe staff that her boyfriend had taken some drugs and had passed out. They called an ambulance, and when the paramedic came, he took one look at the man and said, "He's gone." He hauled the man out to the ambulance, and I saw the dead man's face. It was the color of charcoal, and snot was gushing out of his nose. It was gross and not at all nice to see, but the paramedic wheeled him out without covering him up. When I got back to the hostel at dinner time, I saw the woman from the cafe. She was living at the hostel. She didn't seem bothered at all about her boyfriend's death. Nothing close to what some people here have experienced, But when I was a kid, my dad was waving a gun around, threatening to kill himself, threatening to kill my mom, yada yada. He pointed the gun at her, and I jumped in front of her and bodily blocked her. I didn't even think about it. Even afterwards, more than being scared for myself, I was terrified of losing my mom. Even now I do it again. I'm more scared of losing my mom or sister and having to live without them than I am of anything else. Edit, I wanted to add a couple of ghostly stories. When my sister and I were younger, we shared a bed, and one night I woke to her sitting up, staring into the living room. This was common because she had a near-death experience as a toddler and experienced a lot of paranormal stuff afterward. But normally I didn't. This time I looked and saw what she saw, a man standing in the living room staring at us. She asked me if I saw it too, and I said yeah. Anytime we took our eyes off him, he'd come closer. I don't remember anything that happened after that. And then more recently, I was trying to sleep and just randomly opened my eyes and saw a floating bright white orb/light in the middle of the room, and then it flew through the wall and disappeared. Scared me so bad I woke my sister up, we still live together, and had her stay awake with me for a while. I have PTSD, which causes paranoia and severe anxiety, so it really freaked me out on top of the overall weirdness and scariness of the situation, ha ha ha. I used to be a master electrician working for a very large public electricity conglomerate. I was working at a dam. I'm keeping this vague on purpose. A different person was working in some switch gear, extremely high voltage switch, with all the proper sign-offs and proper paperwork, safe as could be. I was working on a different project in a nearby area. But he needed to get some additional wire, so he had to open the wire chase above the switch he was working on. A different wire that ran through the same space had worn a hole in it over the years, and when he was moving things around, it made contact with the cabinet. And boom, he got hit. I don't want to relive it in too much detail, but I will say there wasn't a lot left of him above the waist. I am not retired and still have nightmares and severe anxiety at random times. I still worked for around 10 years after that. My fiancé overdosed on fentanyl. Thanksgiving night 3 years ago, I was able to grab Narcan from my first aid kit and save him. He would succumb to his second OD 2 months later. 2 years after that, a friend who slept over overdosed in front of me, and again I relived the trauma from my fiancé, but again I had Narcan, and I performed CPR as I waited for paramedics. I broke his ribs. I was screaming at my roommate for more Narcan as he wasn't awake yet. She flew to her car and brought it back to me, and that woke him. We had all of that Narcan because of what happened to my fiancé. It's something I insisted on with my loved ones since losing him. My friend did live and is fine today and sober. I saved his life. Almost died skydiving. We jumped out of the plane and turned around, my arms were out, and the instructor kept telling me to yell to get oxygen flow going. I passed out at some point, and when I came to, we were spinning in mid-air. The guy I was strapped to kept yelling, "I have to cut it." And I was on the verge of vomiting. He cut the parachute and deployed his backup one and began yelling at me about how I tucked my arms in at the wrong time, causing the deployment of the parachute to get tangled. How I needed to follow directions and almost ended our lives. I think it was his adrenaline, but I was so out of it and confused I didn't understand what was going on. I kept saying I was going to throw up, and he calmed down and said, "Hey, just look at how beautiful this horizon is." That made the nausea go away, and I was so happy we landed safely. My friend at the time was in the plane, set to jump after me, and saw the whole thing unfold. Her jump was delayed due to what we encountered. I saw a cyclist moments after she was hit by a car. I still have flashbacks to the blood running down her forehead and cheeks, her screaming in pain, and the confusion on her face as she didn't know what happened nor did she recognize her husband, who was cycling with her prior to the accident. I was so lost when it happened. The guy I was with was former military, I believe, and he rushed to her and helped her husband stabilize her and tried to calm her down and cover her with blankets as I called an ambulance. That's the only thing I could do. Barely. I was in shock. This happened about 5 years ago. And I don't know what happened to her. I think about her from time to time and wonder whether and how she has recovered. It was and still is very scary to me. How quickly our lives can change. Eclipse. Scary to varying degrees and in different ways, but the sight of the restraints on my wrists and ankles on a hospital gurney with no recollection of how I got there or why I was restrained. The sight of my cousin having self-harmed pretty badly and bleeding all over the floor. I was 8, she was 13. My mom's scream was palpable. The look on an old friend's face after she came outside her house after finding her father hanging in the garage. We were 5 or 6. She never really recovered from it. The older sister who was watching us scream is another one I'll never forget. The tree line was hastily approaching below a steep embankment at about 50 miles per hour after a turn gone wrong. The corpse of a friend who was like a little brother to me. He was only 22 and in incredible shape. An unimaginable waste of a wonderful young person. The fragility of life. Kensington, Philadelphia. The only place I've stepped over multiple corpses to get a can of Coke at the corner store. If you know, you know. Barrel of a gun. Seen it 2 times and always had a good, and honest, explanation out of it. But goddamn. It doesn't make it less scary. The first time I was land surveying, I had found the property pin and could say, "Sir, I am not on your land. The line is here," where I tied this tape to the pin. The second time I snuck out from my grandma's to smoke a bowl and look at the stars down the road a piece by an abandoned gas station, some guy stopped his truck, pulled on me, and I told him, "I'm Wendell's new wife's grandson. She doesn't know I smoke, so I came over here because I recently moved to Atlanta, and we don't really see the stars out there." I saw that same motherfucker that pulled a gun on me at Thanksgiving. Turns out he was my cousin by marriage. Possibly my nephew, I didn't ask too much about it. Came home from wrestling practice at age 15 to find my dad on the floor. He had a stroke, and only half of his body was working. Seeing his face drooping on one side and seeing him in such a state was frightening. I called the ambulance. Against his wishes, he told me he didn't want to make a big fuss, and I had to call them back to ask them not to turn the siren or their lights on. He didn't want to alert the neighbors. He passed away a couple of days later in ICU. When I was about 10 or 11, I stumbled upon a man who had committed suicide in his car. From what I can recall that my memory hasn't suppressed, he had a pistol in his hand and a wound on his temple. There was dried blood and brain matter all over the passenger side of the car. I didn't really know how to process it. I just went to the local courthouse and told a police officer, and then they took me home and told my parents what I had found so they could console me. Never get the sight of that gore out of my head. I don't really consider it scary and low-key don't really know what to consider it, but it's probably about the only story I have that even somewhat fits. I think the scary part is how easy and effortless it was for the guy when the time came. My mom used to send me news articles and whatnot all the time of cars driving off the side of this mountain that was a part of my commute, as well as people committing suicide by jumping off this overpass I routinely took. I'm not sure if it was a scare you into taking a different route thing or what. But one day I'm driving over the overpass and see a car parked on the side, and I think, oh shit, it's one of those articles. I drive by the car and notice there's a person in it just sitting there. I'm not sure what my plan was, but I immediately pulled over and was parked probably about 50 to 75 feet in front of their car. In my rearview mirror, I saw the person open their door and get out, so my reaction is, oh fuck, and I get out. I turned around just in time to see the guy grab the side of the overpass and hop over. I jogged to where he had been standing and looked over, and he had hit the ground and died on impact, I assume by the blood everywhere. I had to call 911 and deal with all that. But to this day one of the most vivid parts of that experience that I remember is that cars were driving by and honking. Nobody stopped, but lots of people honked. I still think it's weird so many people were honking as they drove by. The worst part was the police officer showed up and tried to open his door, but it was locked, so he went around to the driver's side door and opened it and unlocked the car. He told me to try to open the passenger door, and I did, and it opened. Then he's like, "Can you turn the music off?" It was blasting, so I grabbed his phone. And literally the moment I grabbed it, it started ringing. I remember the word Caesar popping up and thought, damn, he's never going to reach the person he's calling. The officer grabbed it and answered, but Caesar hung up pretty much immediately. I feel like that event had zero impact on me, and I just went about life as normal, but I do think about it all the time. My sister is an EMT, so we joke about the things we've seen, but I don't really share the story with people because they're generally spooked much more than I ever was. It's been almost 11 years now. What a time. I recommend anyone who doesn't believe in ghosts gloss over this. It's also not that extreme, but nonetheless scary. I was about 11 when these events occurred. They occurred in a small time frame of each other. In the first instance, I'm standing outside the building I lived in with 3 friends. All the same age except for the 6-year-old, who was one of us 4. I glance over at the 6-year-old. I saw him in my peripheral hanging out, in a red shirt and white skin, just as I expected. When I looked over at him, whoosh, he vanished. Just as I noticed, one of the other guys noticed and started freaking out. He also saw him in his peripheral and had the same experience I did at the same time. Scenario 2, same age, but by myself. I went out to the store and headed home. Entered the back of the building and headed up a flight of stairs to floor 2, where I lived. As I proceed up and round the corner, I'm abrasively and suddenly approached by a large, brownish flying mass. It didn't seem to have any form but was rapidly flailing about. I watched it fly at me, watched it pass me, and watched it shoot down the staircase. I ran inside the apartment screaming my fucking ass off. Not as bad as the others, but it's always stuck with my family, and it's interesting, seeing both sides of it. When I was 10-ish, I, my older brother, and our dad were putting up the new wire for the electric fence, our backs to the trees. It was a normal day, cows roaming the pasture, our goat and dogs running around. And then we hear a gunshot. Dad pushes us to the ground and shouts, "Who's there?" It's Mr. Barnes, the cousin of a friend's dad. Dad gets up and sees Mr. Barnes, with his shotgun, facing us. For context, while my dad is an avid hunter, it was well known that he doesn't do or allow it on our farm. We've got cows, dogs, goats, and of course, kids running around. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. Dad is understandably annoyed and tells him to take his hunting elsewhere. He doesn't allow it on our property. Then it gets worse. Mr. Barnes says he wasn't trying to hunt but was trying to get that mountain lion by your kids. And points to Snowball, our guard dog. Who was, in fact, very close to us. And who's mostly white with black. Not mountain lion colored. Which means he not only can't see that well and still pulled the trigger but also deliberately pointed his gun towards not only other people but also Dad's children. Dad went nuts. I talk about it a lot on my account. Our dad is freaking enormous. People actually turn their heads at him. But we usually don't really notice, you know? It's just Dad. It becomes normal. Every day you just live with this huge guy. But that was one day when we got a good reminder of what he could do if he lost restraint. He ripped the gun from Mr. Barnes's hands, put it on the ground, and proceeded to literally pick up this grown man and shake him like I could shake a doll. Red-faced, screaming at him that he could have killed his kids. What the F is wrong with you, you fing lunatic? You can't tell the difference between a white dog and a mountain lion? But you pointed a gun at my fucking kids and pulled the trigger? Dad wasn't much of a swearer, especially not F-bombs. Never seen him that enraged before or after. After screaming at him for a while, Dad threw him down, said he was confiscating the gun, and he's going to have a word with the sheriff. We eventually, and obviously, 500% saw Dad's side because, yeah, of course he was in the right. But it was terrifying for us kids, because we saw just how powerful Dad could be. He was capable of picking up another grown man. We stood no chance if he ever became that angry with us. He's used his size and strength before. This was only shortly after he put the fear of God into my older brother for beating me up. But he was obviously holding back, was in control. Was just making a point to him that he may be bigger than me, but Dad's in my corner, and he's a heck of a lot bigger than my brother. It's like when your dog overpowers you. The lovable creature becomes a wild animal. You come face to face with the reality that you would be completely helpless if they turned on you. That was why it was scary for us. It kind of overshadowed the being shot at thing, as dumb as that is. Whereas Dad was, obviously, entirely focused on that part. He didn't know we even felt that way until it came up a few months later. Happy to report that he never became that guy towards us and had a genuine conversation about it with us. Didn't call us stupid, said he never thought about it from that angle, and understood why we were scared. Told us about the time when he and our grandpa got into it, and it almost got physical. Grandpa, being the dad and of that generation, told Dad to come outside and prove you're the man you think you are then. Except, while Dad is enormous, Grandpa is actually pretty normal sized. They didn't get too far into it, just kind of in that angry, posturing part of it, when Grandma called them white trash and told them to go back inside. Good Lord, you too. But Grandpa told him later, that was when he realized Dad was bigger than him. That the old I can still put you over my knee / get the belt thing wasn't going to work. That yeah, he probably would have been laid out by his 15-year-old son if that fight actually happened. That he obviously noticed the size difference, but that was the first time he saw it, you know? Like how we would 20-some years later. From then on, they tried to get along better and made sure to teach Dad to keep his hands to himself and keep his anger in check. And Dad's great. Probably a little more rough than would be okay in today's world, but he knew he couldn't go how his generation was raised. The man learned a Nobel Prize level worth of pantomiming to communicate with me. I have brain damage. He was our biggest fan and was always there for us, no matter how exhausted he was. But that day was just a stark reminder of what would happen otherwise, you know? Mine is probably not as bad as half the posts I've seen in here. but I've witnessed possibly a gang kidnapping someone in broad daylight. To elaborate, I was a grade 8 school student at the time. I was waiting for the bus to arrive so I could go to a tuition class I had that evening. Now, there was this road next to the bus halt that notoriously led to a local gangster region. And a bus came from that road, turned to the main road, and stopped at my halt so people could get in. And that's when it happened. About a dozen motorcycles and 3-wheelers came from that road, with people carrying wooden planks and homemade swords, got into the bus, grabbed a kid from their neck, who seemed 17 or something, beat him up, dragged him out of the bus, put him on one of the 3-wheelers, and just went back on the same road. This was in broad daylight, BTW, like the area wasn't abandoned or something. People saw everything. But I guess they knew better than to ignore what happened. Then there are more scarier events like the Easter bombings and stuff like that, but this was the one I experienced alone by myself. An olive green SUV that used to stalk me all around the city I lived in for month after month. The driver would circle blocks and make U-turns, drive recklessly trying to corner me, and hop out with his gun trying to kidnap me. One time I was close enough to home to get my male housemate to come save me with his own gun. Most times I had to hide under random cars or trespass, hiding behind walls and bushes. It became so unsafe to take public transit in that city because of that SUV that I moved out of my hometown entirely and have never gone back. That driver would follow me to work and home every day. I sometimes took the long route trying to lose him. Getting on different buses and trains to needlessly lengthen the route. One time I stayed on the bus all night, afraid to get off. He tailgated the bus up and down the bus's route all night long, and when I got out in the morning, there he was trying to snatch me. I had many moments where I believed I would die at this man's hands and my body would be lost in some gutter never to be seen again. One night my phone died. A friend had invited me over to their place, but my phone died, and they didn't fucking answer the door no matter how much I rang. I was trapped outside their spot, and the SUV was right there, driving up and down that side street waiting for me. I was hiding under a short brick wall. I sprinted to the nearest big street like I had never sprinted in my life. The SUV followed me onto the major street, where it kept making U-turns back and forth right in front of me. I kept sprinting till the first person I saw. The street was totally empty except for an older lady who was a crackhead at a bus stop. She saved my life by not leaving my side and ensuring I got onto the bus safely. Nothing could ever scare me as much as that damn olive green SUV. It also had a blanket with triangles covering its back window. Windows were tinted. I remember it all. The shadow of my fiancée standing in the hallway looking at me at 2:10 a.m. It said, "Hey." I know the time because I was so confused why he was up since he works at 6. I was watching South Park when I noticed, looked at the clock, and asked why he was up. When I looked back, it was gone. The terror that filled my bones when I heard him snoring loudly in the bedroom 3 feet away and the fact that there were no noises of him walking back to the room sent me into freak-out mode. The floors creaked so badly in that house that you couldn't go 2 feet without waking up. The ancestors around the globe lol. It was one of many things that happened in that rental. I had a woman tailgating me closer than I've ever been tailgated before. She swerved around me into one of those lanes that merges onto the highway from an on-ramp. This one was particularly long. She was ripping over 100 miles per hour easily. She didn't have a spot to merge in before the flatbed semi that was sitting on the shoulder after the lane disappeared, and wham! I witnessed her car go underneath the flatbed despite the safety bar, and the whole top of the car was gone in a flash. The poor truck driver was tying something down, I think, and thankfully saw it coming and ran back towards the cab before the hit. I've seen a handful of accidents that involve drunk drivers, T-bones, rollovers, and such before that I stopped to assist with. This one? I was like, nope, that shit's going to scar me for a long time, and I just kept driving. There was no way the woman was alive. I was in the hospital for a nosebleed that would not stop. I walked into the bathroom around 2 a.m., and while I was washing my hands, blood just started coming out of my nose, mouth, and eyes. I ran in and got my mom's attention. She was asleep, and it began a 20-minute long struggle for air and consciousness. The last thing I remember was hearing one of the emergency response team folks say, "We have to intubate or we're going to lose her." I remember seeing my grandmother, who'd passed away about 8 years before. I've had 3 of those. I have a rare form of vasculitis called EGPA, and my issues have centered on the arteries in my face. I've had about as many embolisms to stop it as you can have, so I've had a lot of surgeries at Duke. I'm generally stable now, but I do wonder a lot what it will feel like to know I'm dying again and that there's very little they can do to save me. I got passed by a motorcycle going easily twice my speed on a highway. A mile or so down the road, I came upon a debris field of various parts of the motorcycle and with scratch and scour marks in the road. Cars were stopped, and people were running to the left side of the road where the motorcycle was wedged under a guardrail. Further up the road, perhaps 30 or so feet, was a man lying under the guardrail with his hands on his helmet. I ran to help, and that's when I saw his dismembered legs perhaps 20 feet further down range in the grass. He was alive and conscious and talking. He said he couldn't feel his legs, assuming it was his spinal cord being severed. A nurse and 2 military guys were there, and they put belts on his legs and kept him from bleeding out. Within a couple of minutes, they had him loaded in a pickup truck and sped off to the hospital. The news reported the story, and somehow he survived. I don't know if it's the scariest, but I was visiting family, and my cousin and her boyfriend were driving us somewhere. The boyfriend needed to stop by a family member's house who had just had an ortho procedure done, hip replacement maybe. We rang the bell at her house, and no one came to the door. Rang it a few more times and got worried because she couldn't go anywhere because she was recovering. Walked around the house and looked into the big front window. The aunt was sitting up on a couch looking like she was watching TV. We knocked on the window a bunch, but she didn't move. Long story short, she had died and was frozen in time sitting on the edge of the couch. My aunt showed up not long after, and she's an ER nurse. She said it isn't uncommon for older patients who have things like knee and hip replacements to have clotting issues and have strokes. I was staying over at my friend's a few years ago. We were both 19-20, and it was her first house with her infant son, so it was just us in the new, unfamiliar house, so we were a bit skittish as it was. We were in bed, laughing at videos when my friend suddenly stopped, locked her phone, and was staring at the doorway leading to the pitch black hallway with a scared look on her face, and then she pointed towards it with her hand shaking, then whispered, "There's something there," and I heard something move against the wall in the hallway. At this point, my heart fell out of my ass, and I have never in my life felt fear like I did in that moment. I felt it in my soul that we were in the middle of a home invasion, and my heart was racing. I felt like I was going to throw up, and my mind was going a million miles an hour thinking about how the hell we were going to protect the baby in his room when we'd have to get past whoever was there to reach him. Then the suspect came tumbling into the bedroom. It was her fucking cat playing with a gigantic moth. I was a kid in the cancer ward. There was a few days old baby that came in with cancer. My mom, being the kind person she is, told the parents to go and get a coffee and just sit for a while. They leave the baby with us. The baby started to whimper, so my mom picked her up and did the walking thing to calm her down. Then mom paused and ran to the baby's room and rang the bell 3 times. The code cart came in with a lot of nurses. The room was too small to close the door while they tried their best to bring the little girl back. I remember the dread and then being scared at what I was watching. Understanding what was going on but my own child brain not fully understanding it. It stuck with me for life, and from that young age, I knew I didn't want that. That being kids due to the fear that it could happen to my kids. Found a friend dead from an opiate. I can still remember how silent it was when I walked into the apartment and immediately in my gut knew something was wrong. It's crazy how silence can be deafening. Left a local swimming hole and heard a crash and came upon a child who had just been hit by a car while riding his bike. This was over 20 years ago, and I can still remember the sounds and the screams from the kids' parents and can still picture the round, body-sized crater smashed into the car windshield. Another is when I was 10 or 11, I was walking through a train tunnel that was a little over a mile long with my uncle. A train hadn't come through in years, and when we got about halfway, which was the darkest part, we heard the train whistle and the train coming. It was a crazy experience to see a train coming barreling at you, and my first instinct was to run even though I knew I couldn't outrun the train. We had to jump to the side of the tunnel and make ourselves as flat as possible. It was so loud and windy as the train passed so close to us. I got drunk at a crappy hotel bar with this big dude who was wearing a cowboy hat and duster in Wichita, Kansas. Walking outside to go to my room, we smoked a cig, and he was talking about his big rig and how he had a whole setup in there. I was converting a van, so I asked if I could check out the inside. We walked to the dark part of the parking lot where his truck was at, and I, being a big dude, wasn't nervous at all, and he unlocked it and said, "Go ahead and check it out." I'm about to step up, and I get this insane fear just washing over me. I look back, and he's pulling a blackjack out of his pocket. I kind of jump sideways off the step and run. He yells, "What's the matter, bud?" So I didn't call the cops because it wasn't like I got beat up, and I was embarrassed. Not even 4 months later, he was on TV, arrested for being a serial killer and maybe the serial killer doctor no, but the scariest thing I ever saw was his eyes. There was death in them when I turned around. I just felt the whole world change for a split second. It's the darndest thing. I'm a 50-year-old dude, and it still gives me chills. His name is Samuel Legg, by the way, if you want to look him up. Coming back from the bathroom at the daycare I was working at in college and seeing one of my babies choking silently. I had already asked his parents not to send Cheerios because he didn't have teeth yet and would stuff them in until his cheeks were full if he wasn't watched. Then I told the older lady working in there not to give him any. She did. I don't remember if I'd had any CPR training then. My instinct was to run over and stick my finger down his throat, and he threw up Cheerios all over my hand and started crying. Then I was crying and yelling at everyone who hadn't listened to me, lol. The second one was a couple of weeks ago. I got off work, and it was raining hard. All of a sudden, a guy stepped in front of me waving to stop, and I did, barely missing the man who'd just been hit crossing the street. I turned my flashers on, and we all stopped traffic, called 911, etc. But watching that poor man flail and moan and seeing the top of his head like mush, it was a lot. I couldn't have been any older than 5 when this happened, so I'm not clear on the details. I do remember being on a road trip with my family and stopping at a rest area. There happened to be a man and woman there as well. They spoke Spanish, and we spoke only English. Somehow, we all managed to communicate through smiles, laughter, nods, and gestures. They were both very friendly. I have no idea whether or not they were a couple or related in any way. We watched as they walked away to rejoin their group, both climbing into the bed of a pickup truck. As the driver pulled away and headed to the freeway entrance, my dad made a remark about not liking where they were sitting due to the danger. We merged back onto the freeway as well, with a few other vehicles between us and them. Just a few very short minutes later, my parents were yelling and cursing, and my dad was applying the brakes. I looked up to see bodies flying. 40 plus years, and my brain's need to protect itself has blocked out the details of what exactly occurred, but apparently, the pickup driver took a blind curve too fast and came up on another vehicle. The driver either hit the brakes and or swerved to avoid collision. The man and woman in the bed of the truck were ejected. I overheard my dad telling someone that the woman has been split in half. We have never stopped at that rest area since, and I used to always close my eyes when we'd approach that stretch of the highway. My dog is trying so hard to be his usual excited self after having what we assume was a massive seizure or a stroke while I was at work. Picking me up from work was the highlight of his day, and he tried to greet me but could only just barely manage it because his balance was completely shot. I got kisses, of course, and he was wiggling as much as he could. All I could do was cry and apologize because there was nothing I could do to help him. The vet wanted $3,000 to diagnose what was actually wrong and wouldn't do payments. I couldn't afford that, plus I didn't qualify for anything like care credit. 7:35 p.m., July 24, 2022. The moment his heart stopped when the vet euthanized him. Worst moment of my life, and I've never felt so helpless and terrified in the hours leading up to it. But it was all I could do, and even now, I still get choked up thinking about it.